Those who called me a disgrace today see me as an example, because I transformed pain into strength and humiliation into victory. I always thought the worst moment of my life was the day I was kicked out of my mother's house with a suitcase thrown on the floor and shouts of shameless. But I didn't know that years later, the true turning point would be much quieter, but much more powerful. It was a normal Tuesday. I had just gotten home from work, tired, happy for my own peace, and quiet, when the notification on my phone popped up. It was my sister, after 7 years without exchanging a word. I remember my hand trembling as I held the phone. It was as if a ghost had reappeared out of nowhere. My first reaction was to ignore it. I always thought that the day they missed me, I wouldn't be there to hear it anymore. But curiosity got the better of me, you know? After so much therapy, so much effort to heal from everything they did to me, I wanted to know what this woman who turned her back on me had to say. I opened the message. It was a simple, "Christina, I need to talk to you. I'm desperate." And I swear that in that second, my mind flashed back to that damn day when she walked into the room accusing me of hitting on her husband. Only I know what it was like to endure those judging eyes, those screams, that public humiliation. I sat on the couch, took a deep breath, and stared at my phone. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. I remembered everything I'd been through. The hurried move, the fear of being homeless, the days eating ramen noodles because I couldn't afford anything, the butterflies in my stomach every time the phone rang, thinking it was just another dirty rumor about me circulating around town. And now she was talking to me, when everything fell apart for her. The most painful part is that I always knew her husband was trash, but no one ever wanted to listen because I was the jealous one, the slut, the troublemaker. I swear I wanted to simply ignore it, delete that message, and move on with my life, but I couldn't. I needed to hear from her everything I'd always screamed to the world and no one heard. I sent a simple, "What happened?" She responded within seconds, as if waiting for me to break the silence. And I read it all. Betrayals, lies, blackmail. A mask that had finally slipped after years of a perfect marriage on social media. She was destroyed, saying she'd been deceived, lost, crying alone. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anger, I felt pity, but I also felt something I'd never felt before: power. I'd spent so much time feeling like crap, feeling guilty for things I'd never done, begging for a little consideration, that in that moment, I realized I'd already won. I was no longer that fragile, lonely Christina who'd run away crying. I was a woman with a rebuilt life, a real home, real friends, a job I loved, a peace no one would take away from me. And the woman who'd stoned me, who'd destroyed my reputation, was on the other side of the screen begging for a little of my attention. That's when I felt such relief, like that weight you've carried for years finally slipping off your shoulders. She asked to talk over the phone, and I accepted. Not for her, but for me. I needed to hear those words, and I did. Forgive me, I was an idiot. I ruined your life for a man who deceived me just like that. I feel like the worst person in the world. I didn't know what he really was. She cried on the other end of the line, and I stayed calm. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't make a fuss. I just listened. And do you know what was most powerful in that moment? I realized I no longer needed anyone's approval. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. I had managed to heal without any of them. When I hung up the phone, I stood there staring at the ceiling of my apartment. I thought about everything I'd been through. The rejection, the loneliness, the shame. I thought about how much I'd tried to explain myself, how much I'd begged to be heard. And then I understood. I'd spent so much time wanting my family to recognize my worth, wanting them to see me, that I hadn't realized I'd seen myself long ago. And I was fine. I was better off without them. That day I understood that a true new beginning isn't about making people admit they were wrong. It's about living so well that you don't need it anymore. I won't lie. That day didn't erase everything I've been through. I still have traumas. I still have moments when I remember and feel hurt. But I also have a strength I never imagined I had. I looked at my living room, at my little corner I built on my own, at my cat I adopted when I was at rock bottom, at the plant I managed to keep alive after so many failures, and I felt proud of myself, of the woman I'd become, of everything I'd endured without losing my mind, without losing myself. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't the family outcast. I was the survivor. That same night, after hanging up, I did something I hadn't done since everything happened. I unblocked my mom on WhatsApp. Not to talk to her, not to get back together, but because I no longer felt afraid of seeing her name pop up. I no longer had that knot in my stomach, that desire to disappear from the world. It was a strange feeling, you know? Like, I finally understood that I didn't owe anyone anything. I was no longer that girl desperate to return to her mother's house, begging to be accepted. I owned my life, my peace, and whoever wanted to be a part of it would have to earn it. I wasn't going to chase anyone ever again. The next morning, I decided to do something simple but symbolic. I grabbed an old box I'd kept in the back of my closet. It held a bunch of old photos, letters, and mementos from when I was still part of that family. I took everything out, looked at each photo, and for the first time, I didn't cry. I didn't miss it. I felt such a distance that it felt like I was looking at someone else's story. I didn't throw it away, but I put everything in another box, more discreet, more hidden. I didn't want it to be on display in my house. My present was far more important than my past. Later, my sister sent more messages. She said she wanted to come see me, that she needed to talk face to face. And I was very honest with her. I told her I wasn't angry, but I wasn't in a rush either. It wasn't her who would decide when I was ready. It was me. And you know what was crazy? She respected that. The same sister who publicly criticized me years ago was now asking me for time, understanding that I had my limits. And I saw clearly, it wasn't her who changed, it was me. Because I rebuilt myself without depending on anyone. And no matter her desperation, I wasn't going to run myself over just because someone decided I was important again. At work, my friends noticed I was different that day. Lighter, more centered. I told some of them the truth, no drama, no embellishment. I just said, I got a message from my sister after years, and they were kind of speechless, waiting for me to freak out or get upset. But no, I was holding on. And that's when I realized how much my life had evolved. Before, I would cry over anything. Today, I have balance. I have clarity. I've built a whole life, solid friendships, a true support network. People who saw me for who I really was, not for what others made up about me. Halfway through that day, I found myself remembering how I'd gotten there. I'd arrived in another state with nothing but a suitcase and a printed resume. I'd spent nights eating whatever I could, walked miles looking for work, slept in shared apartments with people I'd never met in my life. And today, I was there, independent, with my place tidy, my bills paid, my freedom guaranteed. I no longer needed my family for anything. And that feeling was more powerful than any revenge, any apology. I didn't want revenge. I wanted my peace. And finally, I had it. At the end of the workday, I sat down at my favorite restaurant, ordered my favorite dish, and made a mental list of everything I'd accomplished on my own. With each item I remembered, I felt a twinge of pride I'd never felt before, because I'd always been taught to feel inferior, to blame myself for everything. And now, now I knew I was strong as hell, that I'd overcome where many others would have given up, and I promised myself I would never again diminish myself to fit into anyone else's life, not to please my family, not to fit into expectations that weren't mine. After dinner, I decided to walk around the city a bit. I looked at the streets that welcomed me when no one else wanted to look me in the eye. I remembered my first job, the first night in my rented place, the first night I slept without crying. And in the middle of the walk, I understood something simple, but it changed everything. I didn't need any of them to feel complete. I was already whole. They could regret it. They could apologize. They could want to come back, but I wasn't obligated to accept it. And if I ever decided to get closer, it would be by my own rules, by my own will, never again out of need or fear. When I got home, I lay on the couch, hugged my cat, and thought, that was the day I turned the corner. Not because they regretted it, not because I heard apologies, but because I finally understood my own worth. I was no longer the broken girl. I was the woman who survived, who rebuilt, who overcame, and who could now choose. Choose who I wanted around me, choose what I wanted to hear, choose what I wanted to carry. And nothing, absolutely nothing, was going to make me carry dead weight again. The freedom I had won was mine, and no one else was going to take it away from me. In the days that followed, my sister continued to try to contact me, always with a humble, almost unrecognizable tone. But I maintained my composure. I responded when I wanted, how I wanted. Not out of revenge, but because I'd spent too much time putting others' wishes above my own. And I noticed her tone had changed too. She didn't insist, she didn't pressure, she respected. And I realized how much of a different person I was. Because before, I would have given in at the first tear. I would have rushed to resolve her pain, forgetting my own. But not anymore. Now I knew that I was the one who needed to be a priority. My mother also appeared. A short, emotionless message. Your sister told me. She wanted to know if we could talk sometime. And I laughed, alone on my couch. Years without any news, without even knowing if I was alive, and now a simple, she wanted to talk. No, it wasn't that simple. And I understood that I could forgive, but I would never forget, because no one else knew what I'd been through. No one saw my sleepless nights, my anxiety attacks, my struggle to get back on my feet. Only I knew the hole I'd climbed out of, and I wasn't going to pretend nothing had happened just because they were in crisis now. I won't lie. There was a part of me that wanted to rub everything I'd achieved in their faces, to show them my apartment, my car, my peaceful life, my happiness without needing them. But I also knew that this kind of thing is what traps us in this cycle. I didn't want to prove anything. I wanted to live my peace. And that's why I chose silence. I chose distance. I chose to prioritize those who were there for me when I wasn't interesting. The friends who held my hand. The people who believed in me without asking for anything in return. That was my true family. A few days later, I posted on social media. I didn't name names, I didn't make any indirect comments. I just wrote, "The greatest victory is rebuilding your life without needing anyone's approval. Being happy in peace, far from those who put you down. And when they show up, regretful, you'll already be so well that their presence won't change a thing." It was liberating to write that, because it was true. I no longer needed to be accepted. I no longer needed to be loved by those who rejected me. I needed myself, and I was finally whole. A few weeks passed, and I held firm. I remained focused on my life, my work, and my small daily achievements. Every time I went to the grocery store and didn't have to mentally convert currency because I didn't have enough money, I remembered how hard I'd worked to get there. Every time I could buy myself a little gift without feeling guilty, I celebrated. Because I knew what it was like to be humiliated. I knew what it was like to be singled out on the street. And now I knew what it was like to succeed in silence, living well, without needing applause. To this day, I haven't completely closed the doors. Not because I need them, but because I've learned not to live with hate. I don't hold grudges, but I do cherish memories. I've forgiven, but I choose distance. If they ever want to be a part of my life, it will have to be my way. Respecting who I've become, respecting my limits. And you know the best part? I'm no longer in a rush. Because my happiness doesn't depend on anyone. I'm happy because I rebuilt myself, because I fought, because I didn't give up on myself. And if I can say one thing to anyone going through what I went through, it's this. Don't beg for love from anyone. Don't beg for respect. If your family doesn't support you, build your own life and your own peace. Starting over is difficult, it hurts, it's lonely, but it's liberating. And when you free yourself, no one has the power to destroy you anymore. Starting over isn't about turning things around for others to see. It's about finally breathing without the weight of other people's approval. About laying your head on the pillow and knowing, I'm at peace, I'm alive, I'm enough. Today, looking back, I don't feel angry. I feel proud, because I know everything I've been through and everything I've overcome. And I know that my story isn't about the family that turned their backs on me. It's about the woman I've become despite them. And that woman will never be walked over again. Never again will she be silenced. Today, I don't live to please anyone. I live to be happy, and that no one can take that away from me.